Welcome to this crucial episode of Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable. I'm Dr. Dan Sheridan, host of Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable, and tonight we delve into a profoundly important conversation about HIV and AIDS education. This isn't just a health issue, it's a matter of social justice, equity, and community well-being. We're here to unravel why learning about HIV and AIDS is not just a necessity, but a right for students, especially those in high school, where relevant, real-world information can literally be a lifesaver. We'll explore effective educational strategies that go beyond outdated, ineffective policies and challenge heteronormative narratives. We have an impressive lineup of panelists who will share their expertise and insights throughout our discussion. Our Rainbow Roundtable will look at a historical overview of HIV and AIDS. We will discuss real-life experiences, examine tools and resources available for our students, and then look at our future. In our historical overview, it's essential to know how we got here. Our historical overview will trace the roots and evolution of HIV and AIDS from its emergence to current day. We'll look at events, decisions, and figures that have shaped the public health response and education regarding this epidemic. In our real-life experiences, we move to the heart of our discussion. We'll hear fictional yet realistic scenarios depicting a high school student's journey following potential exposure to HIV. These stories are paramount in showcasing the critical steps to take post-exposure and emphasize the vital role that education plays in such pivotal moments of young lives. In our Tools and Resources segment, we preach knowledge is power. We'll spotlight what's available right here in South Florida for HIV testing, as well as online resources that bolster or supplement school programs. We'll also discuss the significance of medication for pre-exposure and the impact of maintaining an undetectable viral load. In our future outlook, we'll discuss the collective action needed to achieve the ambitious goal of 0 new HIV infections. We'll explore new technologies, medications, and community strategies that could revolutionize our approach to HIV prevention and education. We thank you for joining us on this journey today. Before we dive deeper into our discussions, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists and share a bit about their connection to today's theme. Let's welcome Harold Marrero. Harold is the COO of Safe Schools and executive producer of Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable on Happening Out Television Network. Welcome, Harold.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Let's welcome Tiffany Williams, the director of outreach for Safe Schools. Tiffany is also a pop culture guru and host of the streaming podcast, Tiffany Explains It All. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here and have this discussion. I think it's really important to talk about the subject matter that we have ahead.
Absolutely. And let's welcome David Torres. He is a student at Miami Coral Park Senior High School. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Danny.
And let's welcome Star Aditya, representing one of the world's most important advocacy organizations in HIV and AIDS prevention and treatment, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Welcome, Star.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. And finally, we'll welcome Christian McDonald, a PhD candidate at the University of Miami. Welcome, Christian.
Hey guys, welcome. Excited to be here.
As we move forward, let's shift our focus to the present, examining the modern tools and resources available in the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS and the crucial role of sexual education in preventing transmission. Next, we delve into the cutting-edge medical tools and resources available in today's fight against HIV and AIDS, and we explore the pivotal role of comprehensive, honest sexual education in high schools. As we move forward, let's shift our focus to the present, examining the modern tools and resources available in the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS and the crucial role of sexual education in preventing transmission. Let's start by looking at the remarkable medical advances made in the battle against HIV and AIDS. From the introduction of antiretroviral therapy in the mid-1990s, which transformed HIV from a death sentence into a manageable chronic condition, to the latest developments in treatment and prevention, the progress has been truly groundbreaking. We see the evolution of treatment regimens which are now more effective with fewer side effects and simpler dosing schedules. This has dramatically improved the quality of life for people living with HIV and significantly reduced the risk of HIV transmission. Another groundbreaking advancement is the development of pre-exposure prophylaxis, otherwise known as PrEP, and post-exposure prophylaxis, otherwise known as PEP. PrEP is a daily pill that, when taken consistently, can reduce the risk of getting HIV from sex by about 99%. PEP, on the other hand, is a short-term treatment for individuals who believe they've been recently exposed to HIV, significantly reducing the chance of seroconversion. Moreover, the ongoing research into an HIV vaccine offers a glimmer of hope for a future where HIV is no longer a global health threat. While we're not there yet, recent strides in vaccine research show promising results, bringing us closer to this goal. As we move forward, let's shift our focus to the present, examining the modern tools and resources available in the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS and the crucial role of sexual education in preventing transmission. We also recognize the importance of global access to these medical advancements. Organizations like the Global Fund and PEPFAR have been instrumental in making HIV treatment available in low and middle income countries, highlighting the need for a global response to this global issue. Now let's shift our focus to sexual education in high schools. In our pursuit to reach zero in HIV transmission, real-world, straightforward sexual education is non-negotiable. It's not just about teaching the biology of sex, but also about addressing safe sex practices, consent, and destigmatizing discussions around HIV and AIDS. Comprehensive sexual education plays a critical role in prevention. It empowers young people with the knowledge and tools they need to make informed decisions about their sexual health, reducing the risk of HIV transmissions and other sexually transmitted infections. However, the implementation of such education faces challenges, including cultural and political barriers. It requires a concerted effort from educators, health professionals, parents, and policymakers to ensure that young people receive accurate and age-appropriate information. As we explore these modern tools and the essential role of sexual education, we see a multifaceted approach in the fight against HIV and AIDS. It's clear that while we have made significant strides, there's still work to be done, especially in educating our youth. With this in mind, I turn to our panelists with this question. How can we better integrate these medical advancements and comprehensive sexual education into our global strategy to combat HIV and AIDS? And what are the key challenges we face in making this a reality? Who wants to go first?
I was going to say, like earlier, what Star was talking about of just having the conversation of just talking about it, because at the end of the day, it's just who we are. You're going to love somebody and you want to be intimate with them. That is what it is. And having that conversation and getting tested and just taking out the stigma, because let's be honest, in social media, what sells a product? Sex. And why? Because for the longest time, it's been a taboo thing. So it's like even more reason of like, oh, I must have it. But then it starts creating like this, almost like I want it so much and I don't care how I'm going to get it. So they'll go other routes instead of having a conversation. They'll just be like, oh, I'm just going to like force myself on you. And that's where we come into a lot of complications. And what you also mentioned earlier and saying like the age of consent, like, or age appropriate, where is that line? Because for some people it's really, they're a lot younger, and for some it's like later on in life. And so it's like, how do I word this? Because let's be honest, the internet is like at our fingertips. It's in our cell phones. We all have televisions. We all, have social media apps, and you could be scrolling on your For You page and then all of a sudden you see something really appropriate. You're like, whoa. And you have young kids who, like, when I was a kid, I didn't get my first cell phone until I was 15. And even then, that was there wasn't as much exposure to all these contexts of like sex. And then now you have all these parents that are like, oh, but I don't want my kid online because, I don't know what they're looking at. It's like, well, then if they see something and they come up to you and you're like, I saw this, and you kind of like put it under the rug because you're like, I don't want to have this conversation with my kid. It's like, but have that conversation, because if they're coming to you, they have the courage, because let's be honest, nobody wants to go to their parent and be like, hey, I saw this thing and it was like really sexual. And, no one wants to have the conversation, but it's like, we have to have the conversation. And the fact that they're at least coming up to you, they feel comfortable enough to come up to you and say like, hey, I'm curious about it. Not saying I'm going to do it, but it like caught my attention. And just being like, okay, you have, as a parent, you kind of have to almost like swallow your pride a little bit and be like, okay, well, if you're intrigued by this, well, let me tell you what that is, how that happens, and blah, blah, blah. You have that talk about consent. You have that talk about safe sex. But if we keep putting this like cover over it, eventually they're just going to do it. They're going to do it, and they're going to figure it out themselves. And then that's where you have problems, and they don't understand that if you're going to do that, you got to be safe, or you have to get tested, even if you are safe, to still get tested, because you just never know.
I found that out with my parents, because my parents told me when I was younger, when I was in 7th grade, that you can talk to me about anything you want. So I took it up. I'm like, okay, Mom. I asked her a very detailed sexual question, and my mom freaked out. And then I realized I couldn't talk to my mom about this anymore. But then my dad, he's a dentist. He decided to grab his book of different diseases that people get, and he scrolled through all the pictures, and it's like, this is everything you can get if you have sex. So I was exposed to people with sores, like all these different things in their genitals, in their mouth, and all these different places. And what that did is, like, my mom was silent, and my dad overcorrected with a sledgehammer, and I became afraid of sex. And for a long, and it's not even about that. You also had the whole, Cuban machismo social understanding that gay people are wrong, and if you're gay, you will get HIV. So I grew up with this, to the point that when I was going to puberty and, my bones were hurting because I was growing, I thought I had HIV just because I knew that I was gay. So therefore I was like, oh, this is it. Like I got it. And for a long time, I had that fear that anything I did, I would get HIV. And I wasn't able to fully, those scenes of young people, especially straight young people, entering their teenage years, and enjoying their sexuality, or just like kissing someone and having sex for the first time, all that stuff. I couldn't enjoy it because I was so afraid to get something. That all my sexual encounters when I was younger and after I turned 18 were all very strange, weird. I felt guilty afterwards. Not guilty because of who I was, but guilty because what if I got something, and I didn't want to go get tested because of the fear of what if I did get something, and then what I'm going to do with myself. So all of that was just working inside of me, and it was really hard.
I think that's really how comprehensive sexual education could play a great part. And I think that when people are against it, it's just because they assume as soon as you say something about sex, then you're promoting it. And it's not about promotion. It's about, just like taking a class and knowing what's going on with your body reproductively and, sexually, because it's a part of us. And as we, get older, we start to think about the risk, but that doesn't stop us from having sex, right? And so then it's like this risk, and then you just kind of get risky and go, well, forget it, because it's bound to happen. I hear that from clients a lot, which is just like, oh, you think that you're just gonna get it? And I said, no, and it's just like when people act like they don't plan to have sex, sometimes. And I'm like, are you kidding me? People plan all the time. You got dressed, you went out, you got on an app, and you planned it. So plan with a condom, plan by taking that PrEP pill, and think about what you want to do. Because now I'm starting to think about pleasure. Because how can not only can I have sex, but not have to have that guilt associated with it. Well, if I'm using a condom, and if I'm, having oral sex and I am using a dental dam, like, I'm actually okay. And I'm not gonna think afterwards, I'm gonna have to go see my tester at AHF.
Right.
It's a different conversation. And I think the more of those kind of conversations, And then it goes back into like, you know, if I go into pleasure, even in high school, I am going to have a little bit more autonomy over my body because I'm going to say, I like that. I don't like that. I won't need alcohol because I know what I like and I know why we're here.
Right.
Right. So those are things that I think that when we have like, we do kind of have this risk around sex all the time, but people don't have sex because of risk. They have it because they want pleasure.
Right.
And I'm talking about obviously consensual sex.
Right. But even with, you know, I have friends that I asked them, why didn't you get on PrEP? And their response was that their doctors were very much against PrEP. Like their family physician was very aggressive and judgy about PrEP. Almost like if you have PrEP, then obviously you are, you know, whatever word you want to use to describe someone that likes to have sex or that wants to have sex. And that's very unfortunate because we're not utilizing what we have right now.
Yeah, and I think also like, you know, this idea of like sexual education, right, within our communities and thinking about, you know, Dan's question earlier about, you know, how do we really bring all of these, you know, different factors together to kind of like, you know, reduce HIV infection and also like be able to find a cure. And I think ultimately we need, you know, when we think about the infrastructure, like this top-down, right, effect, where if our political leaders, right, have these same different views, right, that's going to affect policies. And so like I'd like to give an example. Here in Miami, we have a lot of transmission through intravenous drug use, right? And so a number of years ago, physicians and public health experts were really pushing for a needle exchange program. And so ID Exchange is kind of like the program that we have now here in Miami. Kind of came about right from this concept. And so but there was a lot of pushback, right, from political leaders because, right, you know, one way that you could frame it is that I'm providing individuals with needles so they can, you know, use drugs, right? But like from the, you know, public health epidemiological world, right? Like there's this concept of like harm reduction, right?
Exactly.
And so the purpose is like, no, I'm giving people clean needles in order for them to like safely, you know, use these substances to prevent HIV transmission, right? And so like, you know, this question about substance abuse is like another health problem, right? But like we're trying to reduce transmission of HIV, right? Which will ultimately lead to all the goals that we have in public health, right? Especially here in Florida, where, like I mentioned before, South Florida is ground zero in the United States for new HIV transmission. And also we have a number, I think like 3 or 4 other in the top 20 cities in the country for HIV transmission just here in the state of Florida. And so like we need that support from political leaders in order to really reinforce, you know, policies and create new policies to prevent transmission and provide people with education that, you know, in a lot of places they don't have access to.
I think a good, Go ahead. I think a good summary of it all would just be, if you're going to do anything, do it safely. Like, as you say, like with HIV, it's if you're going to have sex, like which you are at some point, do it positively, not positively, safely and like prepared. And if you're going to use drugs, do it in the least harmful way possible, I guess, like to stop the spread of any intravenous diseases and things like that.
I am curious about your high school perspective of sex education in 2023. What does it look like?
None.
No.
None.
Moving on.
No. I mean, it's always a thing at the beginning of the year. They make us sign that we consent to, like, since middle school, since like 6th grade, they've made us consent to it, but it never comes around. If the closest that we got was my 8th grade year when COVID hit. Was a week before we were supposed to start our thing, which I honestly didn't believe we were going to start it, to be honest. Nothing happened. In my 12 years of public high school, the closest that sexual education has come as a topic has been in 5th grade when my teacher took it as her responsibility to teach the young girls of our class about their periods that they were going to come up, and then the boys weren't allowed to learn about them. She moved us from the classroom and they gave us a pamphlet.
Wow.
So we didn't even learn about,
Yeah.
I'm thankful for her in a sense because she took it as her responsibility to teach the young girls of our class, like my classmates. But at the same time, like, I think it would have been more productive to do it like inclusive everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's wild because we went to the same high school. I obviously graduated, but I remember that we started getting sex ed in 5th grade, and then 6th grade we got sex ed, 7th grade we got sex ed, 8th grade we got sex ed, and high school we would get all put into the auditorium, and they would teach us safe sex. And we had a freshman class, freshman leadership or something like that, freshman orientation class, that we spent 3 months learning about safe sex practices across the board, including LGBTQ plus safe sex practices. I mean, it helped that my teacher was LGBTQ plus; he was a queer man, but we were taught this, and it was never a problem. There was nothing that no one came in and stopped it and said you can't do that. So it's crazy how much has changed in just a couple of decades, that this was okay and then it became not okay, and now they're not even talking about it because of what? Some crazy social backlash.
Well, but it's organized.
It is organized.
It's people who don't want comprehensive sex in schools, whether it's the parents or community. And I've sat in a couple of those school board meetings, and just the misinformation that is given to them, but they're organized, and I feel like parents who want this need to be just as organized.
Right.
And because I kept thinking, I was like, well, what if parents do opt out? What are the kids learning then? And that wasn't discussed. So I'm like, so you learn nothing, or like some of the curriculum, or none of it. Oh, I think at one point they said, well, what if the parent wanted to opt out to just this section of it? They hadn't discussed it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, these are kind of things that it's like, and I really would have loved to see more teenagers there to, go, not only do we want this, but we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And not just teenagers, middle schoolers, right? And, people who just want to learn about it and know the facts.
I mean, at my school, like what you're saying, that it should be like, you shouldn't like the opt-out thing, the aspect of that. We had a program that when I was a freshman, my first year of high school, it was upperclassmen teaching our freshmen, and they introduced topics like LGBTQ sex, and like what identities and sexualities, and they taught about heterosexual sex, and it was not part of the curriculum, but it was like a club that came to the freshman experience classes. Mm-hmm. And obviously like the parents had a sort of say in it because this was after the pandemic, a little bit of stuff changed after that. And so you can opt out of like certain things. And I thought it was a really cool thing to be part of. So I joined it as an upperclassman. But ever since the Don't Say Gay law in Florida, they removed it completely. Not even just LGBTQ safe sex practices or anything like that, just straight up the entirety of sex. And I think that's really like, that's unsettling. It's an entire generation, an entire class, grades, levels, everyone younger than me is not gonna have the opportunity to hear something like that. And it happened the year I finished my freshman year. It just ended completely. And I'm really surprised that you mentioned the auditorium thing, because they would never do that now. Like never.
Poor kids.
Like the furthest that we go in this, because it's an 8-module curriculum. We come like every 2 weeks to freshman experience classes. The furthest that they go with this is teaching consent. Mm-hmm. That's it. They don't use the word sex once in the entire of the 8 modules. But when I was a freshman, it was an entire module of its own, which is crazy to me how far back we went.
Yeah.
In 2 years.
I know.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I think it's really important because, like, it's interesting hearing your perspective from being in high school, and your perspective from being in high school. And I'm like, I'm somewhere in the middle because I'm like, I'm a little older than you are, but I still remember, yes, around 5th grade of the same like conversation of like, okay, the boys have to go to another side of like the room, and the girls like have to have this really awkward conversation. And I think it was really interesting because I agree with you. I think it should have been like everybody together, because then it destigmatizes also like periods to boys.
Yeah.
And it's not like, ew, blood. It's like, listen, it is not as fun. Trust me. It's no rainbow sunshine. And it's not that. Okay. It's not fun for me. I get it. It's not fun for you either. You know, but it's just, again, like there's just, it's almost like you want to put the cloak and the mirror and the smoke just to kind of like the illusion, like you don't need to know this. It's like, no, you need to know this, because if you are, you know, straight, or you have a partner that does have a period, you know, you're not going to be weirded out by it, you know. You're like, but it's just, again, it's
50% of the population goes through something that maybe everyone should know about.
Yeah, exactly. And it's wild that, you know, this younger generation, they don't get to have that conversation. They don't get to have even like just the word itself. Again, it's like a smoke screen. It's like, we don't talk about that. And it's like, it's happening, but we don't talk about it. It's like, well, then we need to talk about it. And then I also agree with Star that there should be a lot more youth at those school board like meetings and being like, hey, like, this is happening. Like, we're actually doing these things. You're telling us not to do it, but we're still doing it anyway. It's like,
and the youth are paying attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Like every talk that you don't have about sex, and you know, when people are organizing, like kids are in the room when and they know they can tell when an adult, you know, starts to get cringy, you know, and now all the adults are really upset. And some are really upset. And we go, why? And then, so not only do you not tell them about sex, you don't tell them why they can't talk about sex. You just leave them in the dark. And it's something that maybe they'll get to talk about later, but definitely not now. And not now meaning 4 years. That's a really strange like place to put children in. Because these are now going to be adults who do the exact same thing.
Right.
Because their parents couldn't handle it. The adults around them couldn't handle the conversation. So they don't get to have one with the adults. They'll have them with themselves.
Absolutely. It raised a lot of questions for our future, which brings us to our next segment.